I think I got that. Okay. So chapter 16, Crisis of Tradition. Basically, I found it sort of interesting that Rambam didn't see himself in line with Jewish philosophical traditions. As a matter of fact, he denounced, rejected its very existence, and saw himself as, it's not possible that he was not aware of all of the Jewish philosophers that preceded him. And I don't know if it was arrogance that he just rejected all of them. But the rest of that chapter dealt with the fact that he was very willing to criticize standard Jewish traditions. He took issues with aspects of Talmudic traditions, which were not in keeping with intellectual honesty. He attacked the whole idea of astrology. Things should not be accepted simply because they're old. And then then the question was, did he criticize? Get Jennifer here. He criticized Aristotelian tradition as well, as too authoritarian, where he said that everything that Aristotle taught about what was below the moon, in other words, in the earth, was absolutely true, but anything that he said about the spheres was merely speculation. And he was critical of Aristotelian dogmatism. Rather than, he did not try to establish his own thoughts as a new source of intellectual authority. He admitted what he didn't know, called into question his own claims, which is sort of interesting. Is the guide, he says, Micah Goodman says, is an anti-authoritarian book. Sort of interesting. So that was basically what he talked about in chapter 16. Chapter 17, where do we go once we've moved on? Alan.
Yes. What do you think he would say today, now that our current tradition is the Rambam's tradition? I mean, he was writing, 800 years ago, 900 years ago, and now he has been accepted as that tradition. I wonder what his reaction would be. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I want to hear his thoughts. Yeah, at least from Micah Goodman's interpretation of the Rambam, it seems that he would be appalled that he is now the authority. And if you question the Rambam, I told you that the story that of a conversation that I had with the Orthodox rabbi, former Orthodox rabbi from Kesser, where if I challenged the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, that of course I was a heretic. That's very, very good. I'm glad you raised that, Alan, because now, is Micah Goodman correct? Micah in one of these last chapters, I think chapter 18, says his book is simply a midrash on the Rambam. In other words, it's one can understand the Rambam in several different traditions, and he's giving us his interpretation and his tradition of what the Rambam said. I based on that, I think the Rambam would not be happy that he is quoted as the ultimate authority, and anybody who questioned or challenged him would be have a problem. So in chapter, anybody else have any thoughts on that? Or should we just chapter 17? Chapter 17, where do we go from here? I think it's from perplexity to mysticism in politics. And that's basically what he says. Once the gates are opened, we have to continue the journey on our own. So if, my thought was, the book is called the Moreh Nevuchim, which we translate as the guide to the perplexed. The word Moreh is the same, comes from the same word as the word Torah. And the roots are lirot, actually to shoot. One might translate the word Torah, which we never do, as either guidance or direction. So the Moreh Nevuchim is not, here are the answers to all of your perplexities, but it's a guide to how you might think about these things, because at the end we're left with being perplexed. So what are the two directions that he says one can go after one has explored the intellect to its end, and he sort of sees there being an end, is mysticism. And does somebody want to tell me what mysticism is? Somebody have a good definition of mysticism? Mysticism. Which,
Rabbi, I'll take a shot.
Good. Go ahead, Alan.
That which we do not understand and we do not have a physical basis for knowing why things occur.
Okay. I would, in Judaism, my sense is there are several paths toward God. One path is study of texts, and the study of texts will lead to a greater knowledge and closeness to God. The other path is observance, being very scrupulous in one's Jewish practice is a path to knowledge of God. And mysticism is yet a third path, which is a direct contemplation of God. One could call, Martin Buber a mystic. Martin Buber was not interested in Jewish practice, Jewish observance. He was quite knowledgeable, yes. But Martin Buber's religion was one of direct human to God, without anything intervening. So when Micah Goodman talks about it as being post-intellectual contemplation, the mystical desire for consciousness to dissolve into an all-encompassing awareness of God, I think that's where we're going when he talks about the direction that one can go is sort of internal, is personal, one-on-one connection to God. Except that, of course, with his denial of, It's God is a contemplation. When we go through Maimonides, God is a contemplation of nothingness.
I've seen it.
Right? In other words, there is a term for this. It is the contemplation of Ephes. Ephes is a philosophical term in Jewish philosophy. Ephes means nothing. And it's to contemplate God without words, to have a mystical experience, to have mystical insight, to have mystical. So that's one direction. And the other direction, he says, is politics. Now, it doesn't mean that you're a Republican or Democrat. Turn that off. Okay, no idea who that is. So it's not, partisan politics he's talking about, but he quotes this, I think it was from Jeremiah, this text in which Jeremiah talks about leading toward loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness. In other words, being engaged in the world, to social political action, which is to be involved in the well-being of society. I think that's what they're talking. We talk about politics and we talk about partisan politics. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about using the love and awe of God as the next step after intellectual pursuit, as far as you can take it, to being engaged, to being directly engaged in the world. So that's what I took away from then chapter 17. Chapter 18 is this idea of love and awe. How do we get to love? How do we get to how do we command emotions, which of course you can't do, but you can cultivate habits that give the rise to the feeling of love. So the study of nature will lead to a increased amazement in the world, so that's one way to nurture this sense of love and awe. And then he has a short section here on the interplay between the intellect and emotion. There's some people who say that they are, and make the case that they are really in two different worlds. The intellect is one and emotions are another. Maimonides, and he also quotes Einstein, to saying that the intellect will have an effect on the emotions. Love and awe arise both from greater knowledge and a sense of a lack of understanding. That which we do not know can also lead to a sense of awe. Then he gives, how he has, in other words, before I mentioned, in the title, he says, this is Maimonides and the book that changed Judaism. And the question is, how did it change Judaism? And he gives us a couple of examples here where he talks about the idea of providence. The traditional view of providence is that God is aware of each of us and protects us from cosmic loneliness and gives us a sense of self-worth. That's providence. That's the traditional view of providence, as opposed to Maimonides' idea that providence is the spiritual achievement of one who seeks God. And then prophecy. A traditional view of prophecy is one of God deciding to be involved in human life. But from Maimonides' view, in the chapter on prophecy, prophecy is the initiative of the human being who lives life as an endeavor to come close to God. So prophecy is not God picking out a human being, but prophecy is what we can achieve. So in these areas, God and not man is at the center. So what's the goal of knowledge? Is to encounter the limits of knowledge. And I thought of his interpretation of the Arba'a shenichnasu lepardes, the four who entered paradise. You'll remember the one died, one Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, became a heretic, and only Elijah came out whole. And why? What was the fourth one? One died, one became a heretic. What was that? Well, who remembers what the fourth one was?
One went crazy.
Yes.
One went crazy, right? And what was, according to Maimonides, of course, all we have is a very brief outline of the story. I gave you the entire story. So all of what this is all about is really different interpretations. And Maimonides' interpretation is that Rabbi Akiva was the only one who understood the limits of knowledge. And therefore, all the others did not know that or accept that, and therefore he was the only one who came out safe. When we encounter the limits of knowledge, it brings us to a life of awe and wonder, and to an acceptance of living with perplexity. So in other words, this book is not to help us out of our perplexity. It is to accept that living with perplexity is fundamental. That we will not reach certainty, but we will be able to distinguish proofs that are compelling and from those that are not entirely compelling. And I thought very interestingly in this chapter talked about modern day absolute truths that led to Nazism, to fascism, to communism, which brought about a total disaster. That there's something other than absolute truth and no truth. Rebecca.
I just thought there was this beautiful sentence that went even a step further. The full realization of this intellectual project will bring us to a life of awe and wonder, in which we are aware that there is a mystery at the heart of the world, making us no longer able to see ourselves as the center and purpose of creation. And I just thought that was a really interesting and beautiful statement.
Yes, we begin often our intellectual pursuit by starting with ourselves at the very center, and what can we go from there? And Maimonides is determined that the intellectual pursuit, is to not see ourselves at the center. Yeah, that's a very, very lovely sentence. So rather than live where there was in an idea where is absolute truth, or as he says in postmodernism, where the claim is that there is no truth, Maimonides believes that we do not depend on absolute knowledge, but we have to live without self-deception. And finally, in that concluding section, he says there are actually three paths. In one chapter, he said there was the mystical and the political or social action. And here in the conclusion, he adds the halachic. These are three paths. So we've come to the end. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, what stood out to you, if anything, in making your way through these chapters and the Guide for the Perplexed?
The many conflicts within the book itself. It's just idea and then negate the idea and then maybe come up with another 45-degree angle on the negation of the previous idea ad infinitum. There was a bit of arrogance there in my mind. I just seem to smell it. It's almost palpable.
Well, you know, yes, there's arrogance. Arrogance in the sense of everybody else tells you an answer. I'm telling you there is no answer. You have to live life with perplexity.
Uncertainty as well.
Anybody else want to share what what stood out or what surprised you?
What stood out to me was that how much people didn't like this. Seems like many of you didn't like the version of life and God that Maimonides presented. There just seemed like throughout the class sort of a negativity. Maybe I'm wrong. I actually found it very compelling, and I really associated, I don't know, had affinity with a lot of his ideas. So I was just curious if anyone else had affinity with his ideas of God being not like a personal God, those kind of things.
Jennifer?
Yeah, so Rebecca, I think part of where my struggle is in reading this is the way I've been taught about God and sort of the rabbinic view of God and being presented about God. And I do appreciate having some different perspectives, but I think from my perspective, the pushback that I'm giving is that I'm just confused. I'm confused about, you know, kind of where we are today as a Jewish organization and viewing God. And is this something that's taught in rabbinic school about kind of the uneasiness about God or the philosophical view of God? Or do we look at the way the Torah represents God as more of a, with attributes and physical characteristics?
Why not all of those?
You what?
Why not all of those?
Yeah. I'm not sure that there's any sort of dogma that is that's taught about God, but that there are different approaches. I think one of the things that Micah Goodman is trying to tell us is that what Maimonides has to share with us is very modern. That that we don't, that the issue of providence is not that God is there to reward us or punish us, but that it is really, providence has to do with how we pursue a sense of the divine, pursue a sense of the absolute, pursue a sense of truth. That prophecy is not God intervening in history to choose one person and to deliver a message. Prophecy is something that's a potential in each of us. And I think that's a much more modern idea than the traditional one. Barbara?
Yeah, I was surprised also that he wrote this way, or at least that Micah was interpreting it this way this many years ago. And I agree with Becky, because I was, every time I would read something, I go, yes, that's it. I really like the fact that he is saying, don't have a solid, like following by rote, a belief or that could turn into a dogma, because that's not the way it should be. And that you should search and then come up with that there isn't an end answer. And it helped me a lot because of all of the way that we Jennifer's talking about, the way we were always taught about God doesn't ring true for me in the least. And so being able to listen to a Jewish scholar represent it in a different way, it aligned more with how, you can't just, God does not have any physical attributes. That's like, yes, I wanted to say, yes, that's right. So I felt like Becky, I think while I was reading it, more of affirming beliefs that I had, helping me see that my beliefs are still within the realm of the Jewish world, and still being able to look for God or see nature. I found it good in that sense. I'm not fighting against it. I felt myself affirming it as I was reading it.
You can understand, though, why in the generations immediately following the Rambam, people said, whoa, what is this?
Right.
This is not, how can he say things like that?
Yeah.
What was their political stance?
Right.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, David?
Jonathan Thax, among others, very recently raised the issue of science versus revelation. And I think Maimonides antedated him by 800 years. He has to reconcile revelation, Torah, with the increasing knowledge of science. Maimonides in the book, I think, doesn't see a conflict because he sees God as overarching all science. I really wonder, however, if at the end of the book, he himself is perplexed. I don't say that lightly. I don't think there's a definite conclusion. A definite conclusion here. One of the problems I have is in the Anim Me'anim Yigdal, Maimonides talks about resurrection. And I think resurrection is hardly empirical, it's hardly scientific. And I wonder how he reconciles those two. I don't see the answer to that in the guide. And you would think that if you want to encourage a certain kind of behavior among human beings, you would want to emphasize the idea of reward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. My understanding of these 13 principles were rather than a conclusion of reason, that Maimonides was collecting those beliefs that from his vantage point, most Jews had in common. And one of them was resurrection. He's not saying, I can prove it, but this is he was under pressure since we do not have catechism. What is it that you Jews believe? So he put these now. Since then, these 13 ideas, rather than being a general consensus among Jews, has become a litmus test for whether you're a heretic or not, as I was called. Alan?
So in the past, 20 to 30 years, people have written metaphysical books that have tried to explain everything. And I think that may be where Maimonides went. Having written the Mission of Torah, which had a great deal of clarity, at least in my mind, had a great deal of clarity, suddenly it looks like he tried to explain everything from everyone's point of view, almost a be all things to all people. And in doing so, just came up with inconsistencies and contradictions, and leaves it to the reader, as he says in the final conclusion, leaves it to the readers to make their own formal conclusions. So I think he was trying to do everything, and 800 years earlier, he presaged all the metaphysical books we've been reading in the past 20, 30, 40 years.
Hal?
I was intrigued from the beginning, and I didn't quite understand why Goodman's book was so popular among secular and Reform Israelis, whereas the Haredi community had no knowledge of the existence of the book, and in fact, no, they do not study Rambam, and I'm not quite sure I understand what that is about, and I think it may have something to do with things that we've been talking about just now, that his broader appreciation of science, I guess. My second comment is, I just wonder what Maimonides would say about James Webb, which is now sitting within 100 million miles of the Big Bang, the start of the universe. And there's no doubt that within a few decades, there'll be another one that will reach that point. And I keep thinking about that. And a third point is, I was surprised that Goodman didn't. I've been reading a book by a woman named Straussma, Sarah Straussma, who teaches Arabic at the Hebrew University. And she wrote a book that came out a couple of years ago called Maimonides in His World. And she places him squarely in this Arab-centric universe. And I was very surprised that Goodman brought in nothing of this, or at least there's a couple of comments in the book that he mentions, but nothing other than that. Her subtitle of her book is Portrait of a Mediterranean Thinker, whereas I think Goodman approaches Maimonides from a very different viewpoint.
That's interesting.
Patience of a Jewish thinker.
Aside from that, Hal, do you have a sense from what she writes that what she is writing is in conflict with what Goodman writes?
No, I don't see a lot of conflict. I see that I think what you appreciate is that Goodman is looking at a very a very specific area of Maimonides. I don't think it's in conflict with what she says, but I don't think it's the full story. And I guess if you wonder how Maimonides came to the intellectual position of writing these books, one needs the greater aspect.
Mm-hmm. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, two things. One, that the Arab traditions at that time were very affected by the Aristotelian thought.
Yes, so, she talks about this.
The second thing you mentioned at the beginning, that Orthodox Jews don't study Maimonides. Well, they do study the Mission of Torah, which is, how to practice Judaism, how to observe. But I don't know how much they study the Guide to the Perplexed. I don't know. Alan?
I have two sides of family in Israel. My sister is in Hebron, very religious settler kind, and I have a brother is deceased now, but his family is Haredim in Jerusalem, and my sister was very intrigued, but didn't know anything about the Rambam. My brother's family, I couldn't talk to him, but I talked to his son-in-law, and the kids in the yeshiva do not learn, at least from the yeshiva that he was in, they do not learn Rambam, and his kids don't even know the name. So,
oh goodness!
So I was
that surprises me.
Surprised as well. And I guess the thing that's so puzzling to me is why Goodman's book became so popular in Israel, and especially among non-religious Israelis. And I don't understand that.
So if I can break in for a second, and I apologize to Rebecca because she was in line in front of me. But some weeks ago, people asked me about the naming of Maimonides Jewish Day School. And I asked Devorah Wilhelm, and she said directly, she said it's because we respect him as a philosopher and as a doctor. And Chabad, I think, is as far Haredi as you can get. So I'm surprised by some of these comments.
Yeah, Chabad is very not Haredi compared to the really Orthodox. Chabad is like easygoing. You can come in your jeans for services. They want you no matter what. It's an outreach organization that accepts people in bus stations putting on tefillin no matter what. And yeah, I mean, we send our kids to school at Chabad. It's very, very.
We lost you, Barbara. You froze.
Oh.
Yes, I think Chabad is very open and accepting and welcoming But in terms of, if you ask, do you put on tefillin every day? The answer obviously is yes.
Yes.
Do you observe Shabbat and kashrut very strictly? They would say absolutely yes.
But that's B'nai Akiva too. So you have B'nai Akiva with the Kippah Sruga. They're also Orthodox observant Jews. But if you take B'nai Akiva on one end of the scale and compare it to Satmar, I mean, they wouldn't accept them at all. They wouldn't accept B'nai Akiva, but yet they put on tefillin and they pray 3 times a day and they observe kashrut and they observe Shabbat and everything. So I don't know.
Rebecca?
I just had a question, Rabbi, which is, do you know at the time this was written, who was drawn back then, who was drawn to these new ideas and who wasn't? In terms of the response back when?
I'd have to, I would say I knew that once. I would have to go and explore that again.
Fair enough.
So I don't know. A thought that I had was, there is scientific method as opposed to our ideas about religion and faith. Scientific method is that we come to conclusions based on being an experimental knowledge, and at the point where that conclusion is there's reason to update it or change it or overturn it, we're willing to do that, because that's what scientific method really is that we have we come up with the unfortunate word is theories, and we live with them as long as they prove to be true, but we are prepared to undermine these truths by new truths that we discover, as opposed to religious faith, which begins with truths traditionally, and you buy into the truths. That every Christian denomination has a faith statement, and you you can consider yourself a Methodist or a Presbyterian traditionally. Now that doesn't work on an individual way, but traditionally by your acknowledging the truth of that faith statement. So it begins with, so they begin from different places. I have this sense that Maimonides wants Judaism to accept the scientific method. That Maimonides is open to, we begin with knowledge. How do we get to knowledge? We don't get to knowledge with preconceived notions. We get to knowledge in other ways, but in fact, while the scientific method says we can come to conclusions, Maimonides is very tentative even with his conclusions. And says that therefore we live with not faith statements, we live with ongoing perplexity. And I wonder if other people would agree with that. The distinction between the scientific method and sort of our understanding of how traditionally religion works. And it's not just Christianity and Judaism, but Islam and other faiths as well, where there are, if one wants to consider oneself within the faith, Judaism less so, one accepts certain truths. And Maimonides is skeptical about any of that. Thoughts, anyone?
Was it worthwhile to slug through it?
Well, do people feel that this exercise of studying the Guide for the Perplexed, he calls it Secrets of the Guide for the Perplexed, do you think it was worth it?
Yeah.
Jennifer? Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
I mean,
worth
I
it.
guess you wouldn't have hung in for the however many sessions we had if you didn't think it was worth it.
Are they going to be here during the summer?
Yeah, I think it was super interesting. I appreciate it, Rabbi. Thank you for it.
Yeah, I actually had not read it before. And on some level, I had no idea where we were going. I read reviews. I read how, as Hal said, it became so popular in Israel. And I think there are reasons why it became popular in Israel. Israelis have this, non-religious Israelis have this ambivalent relationship with Judaism. On the one hand, they don't want to be told what to do in terms of Shabbat, in terms of, on the other hand, they're, non-religious families in Israel often light candles on Friday night. They'll say that they're non-religious, but they'll light candles on Friday night. Can you get pork in Israel? Yeah, you can get pork in Israel, but I don't think there are too many people who. So there's a real sense in Israel. I live in a Jewish country. I speak a Jewish language. I serve in a Jewish army, and there's, what does that mean? If I'm, if I spend Shabbat at the beach, and I, my first high holidays in Israel, I went to my only relative, who I did not know, which was a distant cousin who was in charge of the computer center at Tel Aviv University. This is a cousin on my mother's side. And I went there. I had no place else to go for Rosh Hashanah. Everybody went to the relatives. I was a student at Hebrew University. I got to my relative. We had a very nice meal, Erev Rosh Hashanah. And then we went, first day of Rosh Hashanah, we went to the beach. I felt very peculiar going to the beach on Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, I didn't go back for Yom Kippur. I had no idea what they were going to do for Yom Kippur. I didn't go back. So I think Israelis, I think the reason this book became popular is because of that ambivalence. What does it really mean? The challenge, of course, when Israelis leave Israel and they leave the structure of the calendar, the structure of the language, the structure of, they really don't know how to be Jews very often, unless they're Orthodox. Because the structure of school, of the army, of holidays, of the calendar, provides, you don't have to think about it. we think about it. We think about it. You got to belong to a synagogue. You have to decide what kind of observance you're going to be. You have to decide that you're going to give your kids a Jewish education. You have to make these decisions here in the United States that Israelis don't have to make. Because I'm going to send my kid to public school, and the public school is working on the Jewish calendar, speaking a Jewish language. They're going to learn about Jewish holidays. It's all there in the structure of the society. So I think that I'm not surprised that this book became very, very popular in Israel, because I think that there is a yearning to, what is this Judaism? What does it mean, and what should it mean for me? I think is a very open and valid question that Israelis are struggling with, and therefore you have people. Ruth Calderon, who became a member of Knesset for a while, became famous as a secular woman who's teaching Talmud to Israeli secular audiences. Who would have thought that? Talmud is for religious people. Hal?
I think before apropos what you just said, I can recall when I was 20, and I had taken a series of classes in Tel Aviv, which were preparation for the Teudat Bagrut, or the high school graduation, and the Talmud class was indeed taught by a secular Jew, as was the Tanakh class. But that was, you can't pass high school without passing Tanakh. Talmud was an elective, but both those courses were taught by totally secular people who approached these books from a very interesting way to me. But the other thing I was going to say is I think that reading this book, I would imagine that you can engender a degree of pride of belonging to the same tribe as Maimonides, from just the way he approaches knowledge and the way he speaks about knowledge. And I think that may be part of why it became so popular.
In addition, here's on some level, on his thought, not on his practice, and his thought, a total radical, really a total radical in traditional ideas. One could have thought that he would have been totally dismissed. We have other people who were Jewish philosophers. You can read them, but they're sort of off in left field. Here's a guy who's taking sort of outrageous positions in certain things, and saying, hey, ladies and gentlemen, you study and study and study, and then you're going to get to a place, and we can't go any further. And the fact is, he wasn't dismissed. He's still, here we have as Barbara pointed out, here we have a Chabad school in Portland that decided to name itself a Maimonides school. Now, I still wonder, I would like someday, I would like to have a deeper conversation with Devora or somebody else. What do they really know about Maimonides, and what do they teach about Maimonides, other than he was a great man? I don't know. I told you, I think I shared with you once that the whole idea of having historic perspective is a product of our Western education. In other words, the fact that Maimonides lived, hundreds of years ago is, of course, it's something that becomes very important to us in terms of understanding the development of thought and of Jewish thought. But I was told years ago, and I shared this before, but don't ask a religious Jew, a Haredi Jew, when did Maimonides live? Because that's an irrelevant question. Maimonides lives today, and what he had to say hundreds of years ago is what's relevant today. And I think here we are close to Purim, but if you look carefully at the Haggadah, you will see that idea as well, over and over and over again throughout the Haggadah, that there is no such thing as historic development. There is now. I'll give you one or two examples. We say in the Haggadah, had the liberation of the Jews not taken place, we would still be enslaved to Pharaoh in Egypt. Now that's patently absurd. Aside from the fact, were we ever slaves to Pharaoh, which is a whole historic debate, assuming that we were slaves, that for Maimonides, Moses was 3,300 years ago. The fact that 3,300 years later, history would not have changed had there not been a Moses is ridiculous. But we say it, and there are other examples as well that I like to point out at our Passover table, that where the idea is that history is all flattened into the present, and that is, and it's only Western education, the Enlightenment and Western education, of which we are all products, that gives us a different view, because we look. I'm sort of amazed. Here we are talking about Aristotle and Maimonides. Maimonides lives 1,000 years ago. Aristotle lives over 2,000 years ago. And we're still talking about their ideas. Whereas, last year's novel is already, who wants to read last year's novel? I only want to read this year's novel. All right, so it's, I'm just a last note about a next class. I don't know about scheduling a next class because I have family coming for Passover. So Seder is Friday night, and the day before is going to be crazy for everyone. And then Carol and I are going to be away for the first 3 weeks of May, hopefully. So I'm trying to work on a schedule and to see how we might continue with the next book.
Are they going to be home
So,
during the summer?
do you have would show of hands, people available for a class that would go on during the summer? Oh, okay. So maybe that's what we'll do.
And Rabbi, can you please remind us of what you suggested the next book to be?
Yes, it is. I have it in my room. Susan, you bought it, but I don't remember what the name of the book is.
I'll get it.
Back to the sources.
Back to the sources. Yes, thank you.
Yes, this is the book.
Yeah, Back to the Sources. Oh, that's a different cover. That's a new cover.
Well,
Who's the author that you have there, Susan?
edited Holtz, Barry Holtz,
Barry Holtz, same book, yes. Barry Holtz, Back to the Sources.
and it was copyright 1984.
Oh, an old book. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, well, that doesn't matter.
I think it's really, I'm more familiar with that. It really is a good book. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I will make Jennifer.
You know, Rabbi, you don't need to, because we are, unless somebody else would like to be co-host, but we're packing up the car to head out of town.
Oh, okay. I hope it's someplace nice.
Yeah, it sounds like Hal has something to say, though.
Yep, Hal.
Just people probably know about it, but at noon today, Marat Grinberg, who teaches Russian at Reed and who comes from Ukraine, is giving a talk at the Jewish Museum where you can register.
Okay, I did register. I have to see if I got a link. Okay, thank you for the reminder.
And I just wanted to say I've really appreciated and enjoyed the class so much. I think there's a lot, there is a need, a desire for people to learn and learn more. So I've enjoyed meeting everybody and had really great conversations, and it's just been great.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Bye
Thank
all.
you.
Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay.
Wow.